Have you ever just looked at someone, maybe it's a colleague, a friend, or honestly, maybe even yourself in the mirror, and noticed this literal weight seemingly pulling their features down? I'm talking about that chronic physical tension, a perpetually clenched jaw, or a resting face that just looks profoundly unhappy, even when nothing is specifically wrong. It's a really fascinating phenomenon. We all know people who look like they are physically bracing themselves against some invisible storm. But why exactly do our bodies do this?
Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to do something pretty cool. We're seamlessly synthesizing three completely distinct disciplines: astrology, clinical psychology, and somatic therapy, using their original texts and research to really understand our most deeply ingrained physical quirks. As you'll see, these totally distinct fields of study have actually all mapped out the exact same human phenomenon.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start off with wearing our hidden fears, then look at Saturn's physical toll, explore gelatophobia and the Pinocchio syndrome, examine Reich's muscle armor, and finally, wrap up with disarming your defenses.
Let's dive right into Section 1, wearing our hidden fears, the body as a map. We usually think of our fears as these invisible things, right? Just trapped inside our heads. But what if your body is actually a highly detailed physical map of your deepest internal anxieties? Just think about it for a second. Tension in the jaw, prominent dark circles that just never seem to fade, a stiff kind of wooden posture, and smiles that are either incredibly rare or noticeably forced. Do you or does anyone you know exhibit any of these physical traits? Because this is the core problem we're unpacking today. How do our internal emotional states actually sculpt these very specific, external, physical realities?
Moving on to Section 2, Saturn, the physical toll. This is the astrological lens.
Okay, so what's truly fascinating here is how the renowned astrologer Liz Green frames this in her classic 1976 book, Saturn, A New Look at an Old Devil. For centuries, Saturn got a pretty bad rap as just a malefic, or, bad planet. But Green actually discards that black and white view. Instead, she defines Saturn as the individual's point of greatest vulnerability. It represents our deepest psychological blocks, our restrictions, and our most profound fears. Basically, where Saturn sits in an astrological chart is supposedly where we encounter our absolute greatest limitations.
And the crazy thing is, this translates directly to the physical body, particularly when Saturn is in the first house of a natal chart, which governs appearance. Just consider this piece of raw, qualitative data from a Reddit thread discussing this exact placement. A user noted, "I don't smile unless there's a reason. My face can appear stern or austere at rest." I mean, that perfectly grounds the astrological theory in real lived human experience. It's not just some abstract concept up in the sky. People are self-reporting that they carry a palpable physical heaviness. Let's explore the visual checklist reported by folks with these heavy Saturn placements. We see reports of bony structures, prominent cheekbones, and chronic dark circles. Basically, a look of being drained of vital life force. And interestingly, they often experience a sort of Benjamin Button effect. They look prematurely old and serious in their youth, but oddly youthful later in life. Psychologically, this is tied to early childhood trauma or strict environments that force them into self-reliance and authority way before they were ready. The physical body literally hardens to survive. All right, Section 3, gelatophobia and the Pinocchio syndrome. We're looking through the clinical psychology lens now. So shifting gears from astrology to our second lens, clinical psychology, we draw from a 2010 special issue of Psychological Test and Assessment Modeling, edited by René Proyer and Willibald Ruch. Here we encounter a really vital clinical term, gelatophobia. Derived from the Greek word gelos for laughter, this is the pathological fear of being laughed at. And what makes a gelatophobe unique is their hypervigilance. They completely misinterpret innocent laughter and smiling as a direct, negative attack meant to put them down. Like if they hear laughter in a restaurant, they immediately assume it's directed at them. It's just a state of constant paranoid defense. This brilliantly illustrates the full psychological spectrum of how we humans handle ridicule. You have gelatophobia, which is that intense fear we just discussed. Then you have gelatophilia, which is actually the joy of being laughed at. These are the folks who trip on the sidewalk and immediately take a theatrical bow. And finally, catagelasticism, the joy of laughing at others, often at their expense. Knowing where someone falls on this spectrum tells us immensely about their psychological defenses. But here is where it connects right back to our physical bodies. Clinical psychologist Dr. Michael Titze observed something pretty incredible in his gelatophobic patients.
When they were confronted with laughter or even just felt vulnerable, they adopted a very specific, stiff posture. He coined this the Pinocchio syndrome. The psychological fear of ridicule translates instantly into a wooden, marionette-like physical appearance. The mind's fear literally paralyzes the body's natural movement.
Which brings us to Section 4, Reich's muscle armor, the somatic therapy lens.
So, we've seen the astrological archetype and the psychological clinical observation. Now let's look at the actual biological mechanism behind all this stiffness, which was pioneered by psychoanalyst Wilhelm Reich. The crucial point here is understanding his really fascinating concept of muscle armor. Reich, who spent a lot of time exploring mind-body interactions, proposed that emotional experiences, especially early childhood stress, abuse, or neglect, lead directly to physical tension. This armor is a physical shell, built to protect a person from the overwhelming intensity of their own suppressed emotions, like fear, rage, or anxiety.
Think of it like a chain reaction. Let's break down the step-by-step biological mechanics of how this happens. Step 1. An external trauma or harsh restriction occurs. Step 2. The person is forced to emotionally restrain their natural reaction, swallowing their anger or hiding their fear. Step 3. To keep that emotion down, the body forms a literal restraint pose. And then Step 4. Over time, what started as just a temporary defense calcifies into a chronic muscle block. The emotion gets trapped, and the muscle just remains continuously engaged. And Reich actually mapped these chronic blocks into segments across the body. It manifests as a clenching of the teeth and jaw, unconsciously holding the breath, chronic tension in the abdomen, and constantly tensed pelvic or gluteal muscles. Reich believed he could literally diagnose a patient's specific emotional trauma just by observing where these physical clamps were located. If you're holding back rage, your jaw's locked. If you're holding back anxiety, your breath is restricted.
Finally, Section 5, Disarming Your Defenses, the synthesis.
When we put all the pieces of this giant puzzle together, we get a huge aha moment. Whether you're an astrologer looking at Saturnian burdens resulting in an austere face, a clinical psychologist observing a gelatophobe's fear of ridicule triggering that wooden Pinocchio posture, or a somatic therapist diagnosing suppressed emotions that create chronic muscle armor, you are describing the exact same human truth. Humanity has universally recognized that we build literal, physical walls out of our own flesh and bone just to protect our vulnerable minds.
Now, I know this might all sound a bit heavy, but it's really not all doom and gloom. Let's return to the wisdom of Liz Green for a second. As she states, the study of Saturn is a means for self-discovery, growth, and eventually freedom. And you know what? The exact same applies to understanding gelatophobia, or releasing Reich's muscle armor. The heaviness on your face, the tension in your jaw, these aren't permanent life sentences. They are simply roadmaps, showing you exactly what needs to be unblocked.
So I want to leave you with one final question to chew on today. Where are you holding your armor? Is it in a clenched jaw, a wooden posture, or maybe a forced smile? The next time you look in the mirror or feel that chronic tension, don't just ignore it. Ask yourself what fear it's protecting you from, because you might realize you're finally ready to put that armor down.